Rex hit the door of the patrol truck with both paws before Sam even cut the engine, not the way he acted when he smelled a raccoon or caught a deer crossing the road. The way he acted when something was wrong with a person. Sam had been a K-9 officer for 14 months, and he had learned to read that dog the way he read a crime scene fast and without second-guessing. He followed Rex into the dark and the snow and found her face down in a drift behind an abandoned equipment shed. Her lips were the color of a bruise. Her right hand was still gripping a tactical knife she did not have the strength to raise. She looked up at Sam with eyes that had not given up and said 3 words before she lost consciousness. Don't call it in. Subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell so you do not miss a single moment of what this woman's whisper started. And drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story reaches before it is done. The call had come in at 11:14 p.m. as a missing persons report, the kind of call that got filed on winter nights when someone's adult child had not checked in, and the family had run out of patience before they ran out of worry. A woman mid-30s, last seen driving a rented pickup on the county road that ran east from the highway toward the old mining parcels. No plates called in, no description beyond female dark-hair military build. The deputy who took the call had noted it as low priority given the storm, and passed it to Sam because Sam was already running the eastern sector, and because Sam was the newest officer on the overnight rotation, and low priority calls were how the newest officer spent his winter. Sam had taken the call without complaint, which was what he always did, and had driven the county road with Rex in the rear compartment, and the heater working hard against the cold, and had been thinking about nothing more significant than whether the diner in Creston would still be open at 1 a.m. when Rex went rigid. The change in the dog was total and immediate. 1 second Rex was lying with his chin on his paws, doing what he always did on slow patrol nights. The next second, he was at the partition between the compartment and the cab, both front paws up, his whole body trembling with a focused, insistent energy that Sam had only seen from him twice before in 14 months, both times when they had found people who were badly hurt and running out of time. Sam pulled over before he consciously decided to. He got out and opened the rear door, and Rex was moving before his paws hit the snow, nose down, pulling hard in the direction of the equipment shed that sat back from the road on a gravel access track. Sam followed with his flashlight and his hand on his sidearm, and his mind running the fast automatic calculation of a young officer alone in the dark on a night when backup was 30 minutes away at minimum. Rex found her in 12 seconds. She was face down in the snow behind the shed's eastern wall, partially sheltered from the wind, but nowhere near sheltered enough. She was wearing a military-issue cold weather jacket over what appeared to be civilian layers, and her boots were tactical, not hiking the kind of footwear that cost $400 and was designed for people who operated in conditions that were actively trying to kill them. Her right hand was still gripping a fixed-blade tactical knife with the grip of someone who had passed out before she could put it away. Sam dropped to one knee and checked her pulse, and found it. Weak and slow, but present. He rolled her carefully, and she came out of the snow, and her eyes opened, and they were dark brown, and they were coherent in a way that surprised him completely. The eyes of a person who had not lost the inside of herself, even while the outside was shutting down. She looked at Sam. She looked at Rex, who was standing at Sam's left shoulder with his nose 4 inches from her face, reading her with that amber-eyed focus that Sam had stopped trying to explain to people. Then she looked back at Sam, and she said it. "Don't call it in." Her voice was a damaged whisper, the voice of someone who had been in the cold too long and had used up the last of her reserves getting those words out. But there was nothing confused or delirious about the way she said it. She meant exactly what she said, and she needed him to understand exactly why she meant it, and she did not have the strength left to explain. Sam looked at her for 2 full seconds. He thought about the radio on his belt. He thought about protocol and liability, and the 14 months he had been doing this job without a single deviation from procedure. He thought about the expression on this woman's face, which was not the expression of someone confused by the cold. It was the expression of someone who had calculated the exact danger of the next decision and was asking him with everything she had left to make the right one. He picked her up. Rex was already moving toward the truck. Sam got her into the rear seat and got the heat running at full, and pulled off his patrol jacket and put it over her, and then sat in the driver's seat and looked at the radio for a long moment. The dispatcher would be expecting a check-in from him in the next 20 minutes. Going dark on a missing persons call was the kind of thing that ended careers on the short end and ended officers on the bad end, and he knew it. He turned the radio to the secondary channel and clicked the mic twice the non-verbal signal for signal interference, and then he drove. He did not drive toward Creston Memorial. He drove toward the service road that led to his uncle's hunting cabin, 12 miles off the county road, empty, since November, stocked with firewood and canned goods, and a first aid kit that his uncle kept military grade because his uncle had spent 20 years in the army and believed that the distance between a bad situation and a worse one was usually the quality of the supplies you had on hand. She was conscious again by the time they reached the cabin. Conscious and shivering hard, which Sam recognized as a good sign. Shivering meant the body was still fighting. Rex rode beside her in the back seat with his flank pressed against her legs, and Sam did not ask the dog to move because Rex had clearly decided that his current position was not optional. Inside the cabin, with the fire going and the woman propped against the wall with 3 blankets and a cup of water, she could barely hold. Sam got his first real look at her. She was somewhere in her mid-30s, lean, and built the way people were built when physical capability was a professional requirement rather than a personal choice. Her hands, even now, even shaking with cold, had the particular stillness of hands that knew what they were capable of. There was a bruise along her left jaw that was at least 24 hours old, and a cut above her right eye that had been field-dressed with medical tape that was precise and even, and had been applied by someone who knew exactly what they were doing, which meant she had dressed it herself. "Rachel Hunter," she said. She said it with the flat directness of someone giving a report. "Petty Officer, First Class, U.S. Navy. Assigned to Naval Special Warfare Command." Sam stared at her. "You found a Navy SEAL dying in the snow," he said. "Technically, I found you," she said, and for 1/2 second something crossed her face that might have been the structural ruins of a sense of humor. Then it was gone. "I need to know if you called it in before I talk to you." "I didn't call it in." She studied him. Not his face specifically. His whole posture, the way he was sitting, the way his hands were positioned, the small, unconscious signals that people gave off when they were lying and thought they were not. Sam had been evaluated by field-grade officers before, and it had never felt quite like this. "Why not?" she said. "Because you asked me not to." "That's not a reason an officer gives. That's a reason a person gives." "I'm both," Sam said. "What happened to you?" The first mini-climax hit when Rachel reached into the inner lining of her jacket, a deliberate movement she telegraphed in advance so that Sam would not read it wrong, and produced a folded piece of paper that had been sealed inside a waterproof pouch. She held it out. Sam took it and unfolded it and looked at it, and felt the specific disorienting sensation of a night that he had believed was a missing persons call becoming something considerably larger. It was a photograph. Printed on standard paper, not official stock, the kind of printout someone made when they needed a copy that did not exist on any server. It showed two men standing in what appeared to be a parking structure, both of them facing each other in the posture of a conversation that neither of them wanted witnessed. The man on the left was dressed in civilian clothes, but carried himself with the bearing of law enforcement, and Sam recognized that bearing because he had grown up watching it across a dinner table. The man on the right was in a jacket that Sam recognized, because he had seen it on a coat rack in a department hallway every working day for 14 months. It was the jacket of Deputy Chief Eric Daniels. Sam looked at the photograph for a long time without speaking. "The man on the left," Rachel said. "His name is Victor Cade. He runs the distribution network for the Ortega supply chain through 4 counties in this region. He has been running it for 6 years. She paused, her breathing still labored but controlled, each word carefully rationed. "Deputy Chief Daniels has been his institutional protection for 5 of those 6 years. Sam set the photograph down on the floor between them. "How long have you been investigating this?" he asked. 11 months officially. 14 months in total. She looked at her hands, which had stopped shaking as much, but were still not right. "The first 3 months were personal. Before I went to the task force, before I understood that going to the task force was the same as going to the people I was investigating. The second mini-climax arrived when Rex, who had been lying beside Rachel with his chin on her knee, lifted his head and looked at the cabin door. Not with alarm, with attention. The specific quality of attention he gave to sounds that were far enough away to be irrelevant now, but close enough to be relevant soon. Sam looked at the dog. "What do you hear, buddy?" Rex held his position. His ears were rotating, tracking. Then they settled, and he put his chin back down. Sam looked at Rachel. "How did you end up on that road tonight?" She was quiet for a moment, and in that moment the firelight moved across her face, and Sam could see the full cost of whatever the last several hours had been. Not fear, something older and more serious than fear. The expression of a person who has done the arithmetic on their own survival and arrived at a number they are not happy with, but have decided to work with anyway. "I had a meet with a federal contact," she said. "Someone inside the DOJ who had been building a parallel record on the Daniels network independent of local channels. The meet was set for the rest stop on Route 12 at 9 p.m. She paused. "I was 20 minutes from the rest stop when the truck following me made its move. 2 vehicles. They ran me off the road at the Hendricks Creek Bridge. I got out of the truck before it went into the creek, and I ran." "They ran you off a bridge?" "The truck is in the creek." She said it without drama, the flat acknowledgement of a fact that had already been processed and filed. "They will find it in the morning. When they do, they will report a single vehicle accident on an icy road and close the file." She looked at him. "Unless I am somewhere else by morning. Unless someone who is not connected to this department knows I am alive." Sam sat with that for a moment. He was 25 years old. He had been a police officer for 14 months. He had been a K-9 officer because he loved dogs and believed in the work, and had wanted since he was 12 years old, watching his father pin on a badge to do something that mattered. He had not been trained for this. His training covered traffic stops and domestic calls and the proper procedure for evidence collection and the 14 different ways to de-escalate a situation before it became a use-of-force incident. Nothing in his training covered the night when the institution you served turned out to be the threat. Rex pressed his head against Sam's hand. Sam looked at the dog, and then looked at Rachel, and said, "Who is the DOJ contact?" The major twist hit with the weight and precision of something that had been waiting in the room since the moment Sam walked through the door. Rachel looked at him with an expression that moved through calculation and came out the other side into something that looked impossibly like relief. "His name is Thomas Adler," she said. "He's a federal prosecutor assigned to the Organized Crime Division." She paused. "He is also the man who recruited me into this investigation 14 months ago. He is the reason I came to Colorado." Another pause longer this time. "And 3 days ago, he stopped returning my communications." Sam felt the shape of the room change. "You don't know if he's been compromised," Sam said. "I don't know if he's alive," Rachel said. "Those are two different problems, and right now I can only solve one of them." She reached back into her jacket, and this time produced a small, sealed drive on a cord around her neck. She held it up. "Everything I have collected in 14 months is on this drive. The financial transactions, the communication intercepts, the photograph you are holding, plus 47 others, the names of 11 officers in 3 departments who are on Cade's payroll." She looked at Sam with the directness of a person who had made a decision and needed to know if the person in front of her had made the same one. "I need to get this to someone who is not connected to any of those departments, someone who does not appear anywhere in the network I have documented." She paused. "I need to know if I can trust you." Sam thought about Deputy Chief Daniels. He had shaken that man's hand. He had stood in the parking lot at the department Christmas party and listened to that man give a speech about integrity and public service and the weight of the badge. He had believed every word of it the way a young officer believed the words of the men who had come before him, with the open, honest faith of someone who had not yet learned that the uniform was sometimes the last honest thing about the person wearing it. He thought about Rex pressing against Rachel's legs in the back of the truck. He thought about the way the dog had moved without hesitation the moment he opened the rear door, as though finding this woman and staying with her was something he had already decided before Sam had any information at all. He thought about 3 words in the snow, spoken by a woman who was using the last of everything she had to say, the most important thing she knew. "Yes," Sam said. Rachel looked at him for one more second, then she nodded once. She held the drive out, and he took it, and in that moment the weight of it in his hand was completely disproportionate to its physical size, the weight of 14 months of a woman's work and courage and survival, pressed into a piece of hardware the size of his thumb. Rex looked up at both of them. His amber eyes moved from Sam's face to Rachel's face and back, and his tail moved once, a single, slow sweep that meant what it always meant when Rex made that gesture. He had made his assessment. He was satisfied with the result. Outside, somewhere on the mountain above the cabin, the wind shifted and the snow came harder, and the county road that led back to everything Sam had believed about his job disappeared under another 2 inches of white. There was no going back to what the night had been before Rex hit the truck door. There was only forward into whatever Rachel Hunter's whisper had started, carrying a drive full of evidence and a question about a federal prosecutor who had gone silent 3 days ago. Sam put the drive in his chest pocket and buttoned it closed. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning. Leave nothing out." Rachel pulled the blanket tighter and looked at the fire and started talking. Rachel talked for 40 minutes without stopping, and Sam listened the way he had been trained to listen at crime scenes, not for the details that confirmed what he already suspected, but for the details that didn't fit the ones that arrived sideways and changed the shape of everything around them. The fire burned down, and he added wood twice without taking his eyes off her face, and Rex lay between them with his chin on his paws, and his ears moving slowly, cataloging every sound the cabin made against the wind. She had started 14 months ago with a name, not a case file, not an official assignment. A name spoken by a dying man in a hospital bed in San Diego, a petty officer from her unit who had been found in a parking garage with 3 broken ribs and a fractured skull, and no memory of how he got there. His name was Torres. She had visited him because they had served together for 2 years and because nobody else from the unit had come, which was the first thing that didn't fit. He had waited until the nurse left the room, and then he had gripped her wrist with the hand that wasn't in a cast and said one sentence. "They found out I was talking to the federal guy in Colorado." Torres died 4 days later of a pulmonary embolism that the attending physician described as a known complication of his injuries. Rachel had sat with that explanation for 72 hours before she decided it was wrong. Not because she had evidence, because Torres had been 28 years old and had run 50 miles a week and had been in better physical condition than most people half his age, and because the federal guy in Colorado was a name she recognized, Thomas Adler, a DOJ prosecutor she had been briefed on during a joint task force meeting 8 months earlier. She had called Adler from a payphone. Not her cell. Not the baseline. A payphone outside a gas station 3 miles from the base, because Torres had been found 3 days after someone accessed his personal communication records through a system that required a law enforcement credential to enter. Adler had answered on the second ring and had said, before she identified herself, "I've been waiting for someone from Torres's unit to call. I was hoping it would be you." Sam shifted in his chair. "He knew who you were before you called." He had been building a file on the network for 16 months at that point. He had Torres's communication records, the ones that got Torres killed. My name was in them as a known associate. She paused. He told me Torres had given him a single piece of evidence before whoever came for him found out he was talking. A financial record. One transaction, $40,000 moving from a shell company registered in Delaware to a personal account belonging to a lieutenant in the Creston County Sheriff's Department. "Which lieutenant?" Sam said. Rachel looked at him steadily. "Marcus Webb." Sam heard the name and felt it land somewhere specific, the place in his chest where information arrived that required him to reconfigure something he had already filed as settled. Marcus Webb was not a stranger. Marcus Webb was the officer who had administered Sam's field evaluation at the end of his probationary period. He had shaken Sam's hand afterward and told him he was exactly the kind of officer the department needed. Sam did not say anything. Rachel watched him absorb it and did not rush him. "Webb was the first name," she said. "The first confirmed connection between the department and Cade's network. But Adler had been working the financial trail for 16 months, and Webb was not the endpoint. He was a mid-level conduit. The money above Webb moved in a pattern that Adler had traced through 4 shell companies and 2 real estate holding groups, and ended at a personal investment account." She paused. An account in the name of Eric Daniels. The first mini-climax hit when Rex suddenly stood up. Not the slow rise of a dog shifting position. The fast, fluid movement of an animal responding to something immediate. He was at the cabin door in 2 steps, nose against the gap at the bottom, his breathing going fast and shallow. Sam was on his feet before Rachel could speak. His hand was on his sidearm. He moved to the window and looked out without touching the curtain, using the angle of the frame to keep himself back from the glass. Nothing moved in the dark. Rex held his position at the door for 12 seconds. Then he sat down slowly and looked back at Sam. Not all clear. More like not yet. Sam stayed at the window for another 30 seconds. Then he moved back to his chair, but did not sit. He stayed on his feet, his weight forward, his body making the decision that his mind was still processing. "They'll be looking for you," he said. They've been looking for me since 9:30 when the truck went into the creek, Rachel said. She had not moved during the alert. She had pulled the blanket tighter, and her right hand had found the knife on the floor beside her, the grip adjustment of someone who had been in enough situations to perform the motion without thinking about it. The question is whether they think they're looking for a body or looking for a person. How long before they decide it's a person? When they pull the truck and don't find one. Sam thought about the creek. He thought about the water temperature and the current, and whether a body in that water would be visible to a diver, or whether the snow and the dark would complicate the recovery. He thought about the morning shift coming on at 7 a.m., and what the overnight log would show, and whether the secondary channel signal he had clicked twice was going to be enough to explain his absence through the rest of the night. "I need to check in by 6, he said. "If I go dark past 6, they send someone to look for me. That someone would be Webb." Rachel nodded. She had already run this arithmetic. "Then we have until 6 to figure out what comes next." What comes next is I need to know who else Adler was talking to when he went silent. If he was compromised, whoever he told becomes the problem. If he wasn't compromised, whoever he trusted is our asset. Rachel reached back into her jacket and produced a second item, a folded index card with a handwritten name and a phone number in ink, so faded Sam had to tilt it toward the firelight to read it. "Adler gave me this 3 months ago as an emergency fallback. He said if he ever went offline for more than 72 hours without a planned contact, I was supposed to call this number and say the phrase written at the bottom." Sam read the phrase. It said, "The Torres file is still open." "Who's the number?" he asked. Adler would not tell me the name. He said the person on that number would identify themselves and that I would recognize who they were when they did. She paused. "I have been in the mountains for 6 hours. I have not been able to call." Sam looked at his personal cell, which was in his jacket pocket, and was not connected to any department network. He looked at the number on the card. He looked at Rachel. The second mini-climax came when he dialed. The phone rang once, and was answered immediately in the middle of the first ring by someone who had either been waiting for this exact call or never slept. A woman's voice. Professional. Controlled. "Yes." Sam handed the phone to Rachel. She said the phrase. A silence of exactly 4 seconds. Then the woman said, "I've been waiting 9 days. Where are you?" It was not a question. It was the statement of someone who had been holding a position and needed to know if the position had just changed. Rachel looked at Sam. He gave a single nod. She gave the cabin's approximate location, not the address, the terrain description, the way operators gave locations when addresses were a liability. The woman on the other end repeated it back without writing it down, which told Sam she either had a photographic memory or had trained the way people trained when memory was the safest place to keep information. "I can be there by 4 a.m., the woman said. "Don't move. Don't use any networked device. And the officer who called this number, keep him with you." The call ended. Sam and Rachel looked at each other across the cabin. Rex had moved back from the door and was sitting between them again, his head turning from one to the other in the slow, attentive way he had when he was monitoring a situation that had not resolved, but had stabilized. "She knew I was a police officer," Sam said. "She knew someone would call from a personal cell with a Colorado area code at some point. She narrowed the pool." Rachel paused. Adler was thorough. Sam thought about what thorough looked like when you were building a criminal case against the second highest-ranking officer in a county law enforcement department, while that officer had access to your communication channels. He thought about Torres in a hospital bed with a fractured skull. He thought about 14 months of a woman doing this work alone in the margins of her official life, carrying a drive around her neck like a second spine. The major twist arrived 40 minutes later, not at the door, but from Rachel's own mouth in the quiet that had settled between them while they waited. She had been looking at the fire for a long time without speaking, and Sam had learned enough in the last 2 hours not to press, and then she turned to him with the expression of a person who had decided to put down a weight she had been carrying alone. "There's something I haven't told Adler," she said. "Something that's on the drive, but that I pulled from the indexed files, so it wouldn't be the first thing a reviewer found." Sam waited. "Victor Cade does not run the Ortega network," she said. "He manages the local distribution. He is the face that law enforcement sees when they look at the supply chain in this region, because he is supposed to be the face. He was built for that position, funded into it, given the institutional protection he needed to sustain it." She looked at Sam with an expression that had moved beyond the controlled delivery of information into something rawer and more personal. "Cade has been in position for 6 years. The network has been running for 11. The architecture that put Cade in place, the shell companies, the investment accounts, the law enforcement coverage, all of it was structured and funded by someone who understood institutional systems the way only one category of person understands them." Sam felt the cabin go quiet, in a way that had nothing to do with the wind dropping. "Someone inside law enforcement," he said. "Someone who was inside law enforcement for 20 years before he moved into a position where he could be inside everything." Rachel held his gaze without flinching. Daniels did not become Cade's protection. Daniels built Cade. He recruited him, funded him, and has been running him as a managed asset for 6 years. The drug network is not the crime. She paused, and the word landed with the full weight she had been carrying it with for 14 months. The drug network is the cover. What Daniels is actually running is an intelligence operation using law enforcement access to identify and neutralize federal investigations before they reach indictment. He has killed 3 active federal cases in the last 4 years. Torres was working on the 4th. Sam stood up without deciding to. His body made the decision before his mind caught up the physical response of a person whose understanding of the situation had just increased by an order of magnitude that his chair could not contain. Rex was on his feet, instantly responding to the adrenaline spike moving to Sam's side. "Torres wasn't a drug network casualty," Sam said. He heard his own voice, and it sounded far away. "He was a federal investigation casualty." "He was the second one," Rachel said. "The first was a DEA analyst in Phoenix in 2021. Ruled a suicide." She said it without heat. She had been living with this long enough that the heat had burned down to something colder and more durable. The drive has documentation on both. Financial transfers communication intercepts a surveillance photograph of Daniels meeting with the man who was contracted for both operations. She paused one final time. "That man's name is in the drive. He lives 40 miles from where we are sitting right now." Sam looked at the drive in his chest pocket. He felt its weight again, different now from the way it had felt when Rachel first handed it to him. It was not a record of corruption in a county law enforcement department. It was a record of a systematic operation to protect a criminal enterprise by destroying the federal apparatus designed to stop it. It was the kind of evidence that did not end careers. It ended freedom. Rex pressed against Sam's leg with his full weight, the grounding gesture he used when he sensed his handler needed an anchor. Sam put his hand on the dog's back without looking down, and felt the solid warmth of him, the uncomplicated absolute reliability of an animal who had been right about everything so far tonight, and showed no sign of stopping. Outside, somewhere on the road below the cabin, a pair of headlights moved through the dark without slowing and disappeared around the mountain's curve. Sam watched them go and did not breathe until they were gone. 3 hours and 40 minutes until 4 a.m. 3 hours and 40 minutes until the woman on the other end of Adler's emergency number arrived with whatever she was bringing, which was either salvation or a new category of problem that Sam did not yet have the experience to name. Rachel had closed her eyes, not in sleep, but in the deliberate conservation of a body that had been running on will for 6 hours and needed whatever rest it could take in 3-minute intervals. Her right hand was still on the knife. Sam looked at her and thought about what it cost to do what she had done, to carry this alone for 14 months, to trust nobody, and keep moving, and survive long enough to find a young officer and a German shepherd on a Colorado mountain road and say the most dangerous 3 words of her life. He thought about whether he was equal to what those 3 words had started. Rex looked up at him with amber eyes that did not carry doubt in any direction. She arrived at 3:47:13 minutes early, and Rex heard her coming 90 seconds before the knock came. Not the alert posture he had taken earlier with the headlights. Something different. His ears came up and his tail moved once, a single slow sweep, the gesture Sam had learned to read as the dog's version of known quantity, not a threat, but pay attention anyway. 3 knocks. A pause. 2 more. A pattern that meant the person on the other side had been given a signal protocol and was using it correctly. Sam stood to the side of the door with his hand on his weapon and said, "Torres file." A woman's voice, the same one from the phone, said, "Still open?" He opened the door. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, compact, and carrying herself with the particular economy of movement that Sam associated with people who had spent years in environments where unnecessary motion was a liability. She was in civilian cold-weather gear with no identifying marks, and she carried a single bag over one shoulder that rode with the weight of equipment, not clothing. She looked at Sam, then at Rex, then past both of them to Rachel, and the controlled professional expression on her face shifted for exactly 1 second into something that was relief before it closed back down. "Rachel." She crossed the cabin in 4 steps and crouched in front of her. "I thought you were in the creek." "The creek tried," Rachel said. Her voice was stronger than it had been 2 hours ago, the rest, and the warmth doing the work her body needed them to do. "Who are you?" "Special Agent Diana Marsh, FBI Organized Crime Division." She said it without producing credentials, which told Sam she understood the cabin was not a place where credentials meant what they normally meant. "Adler brought me into this 9 months ago as a parallel track. He didn't tell you about me because he didn't want a single point of failure between the 2 operations." She looked at Rachel steadily. "He was trying to protect you." "Where is he?" Rachel said. Marsh sat back on her heels. The 2 seconds of silence before she answered were the loudest 2 seconds of the night. "Adler is alive. He's in federal protective custody in a location I'm not going to name in this room. He went dark intentionally 9 days ago after we identified a surveillance compromise on his primary communication channel." She paused. The compromise originated inside the DOJ field office in Denver. Sam felt the room shift. "Daniels has someone inside the DOJ. Daniels has someone inside 3 federal agencies. That is what the last 9 months of my work has documented." Marsh stood and turned to Sam with the full weight of her attention, the look of someone taking a complete measure. "Officer Black, you've been off your radio for 4 hours. What's your department expecting right now?" "A check-in by 6. If I miss it, Webb gets the call." "Marcus Webb." She said it without question marks. She already knew the name. "He was first on Rachel's list," Sam said. "He's 3rd on mine." Marsh reached into her bag and produced a tablet in a hardened case. She pulled up a document and turned it toward Sam. This is the current active roster of confirmed network assets across 3 county departments and 2 state agencies. 17 names. Webb is on page 1. She paused. Your department has 4 names on this list. Sam took the tablet. He read the first name, and his jaw tightened. The second name made him close his eyes for half a second. The third and fourth he read without visible reaction, but his hand on the tablet was not steady. Your captain is not on the list, Marsh said. She had been watching him read. Captain Donna Reyes. We assessed her independently. She's clean. Sam looked up. You assessed my captain. We assessed everyone in your department above the rank of corporal. It took 6 weeks. She did not apologize for it. Reyes is the reason I'm willing to be in this cabin with a patrol officer I met 11 minutes ago. She has a record that Daniels's network would have corrupted if it could have reached her, and it tried twice. The first mini-climax arrived when Rex left his position beside Sam and walked to the cabin's rear window. He didn't alert hard. He stood with his nose at the gap in the frame, and his breathing changed, going slower and more deliberate, the processing breath of a dog running a scent through its full analytical capacity. Sam was across the cabin in 3 steps. Someone's outside. Marsh moved without hesitation, killing the lantern on the table and dropping to a crouch. Rachel was already against the wall beside the door, knife in hand, the movement fluid and automatic, and coming from a body that had trained for this until training became reflex. The cabin went dark except for the fire, which was too low to throw real light. Sam looked at Rex. The dog held his position at the window for 8 seconds. Then he sneezed twice, a short double expulsion that Sam had learned over 14 months meant exactly one thing. False alarm. Animal, not human. Probably deer given the snow. Rex walked back to the center of the room and lay down. The collective exhale was almost audible. Marsh brought the lantern back up at half brightness. The dog has better operational security than most of the agents I've worked with. Don't tell him that, Sam said. He already knows. Rachel lowered the knife, but did not put it down. The near alert had brought her full back into the room, the rest burned off and replaced with the sharp, thin focus of someone running on adrenaline reserves. You said Daniels has assets in 3 federal agencies. If Adler identified the Denver DOJ compromise, what stopped Daniels from moving the operation the moment he knew Adler went to ground? 2 things. Marsh sat down across from Rachel. The first is that Daniels doesn't know what Adler had when he went dark. The Denver asset could only confirm that Adler was building a case, not the scope of it, not the evidence, not whether you were part of it. She paused. The second is that moving the operation requires moving people, and money, and infrastructure. You don't do that quietly in 9 days in a monitored environment. You do it slowly and carefully over months, and you can't start that process until you've neutralized the evidence risk. I'm the evidence risk, Rachel said. You and the drive. Marsh looked at the drive on the cord around Rachel's neck. Daniels had you run off a bridge tonight because he needed the drive destroyed, and he needed your testimony eliminated simultaneously. He was not aware of my parallel operation or the secondary evidence chain Adler had been building through the DOJ internal oversight channel. She paused. He still isn't, which means we have a window. How wide? Sam asked. Narrow. When they pull Rachel's truck from the creek tomorrow morning and don't find a body, Daniels will escalate. He'll activate every asset he has in the search perimeter. She looked at Sam. Including the 4 names in your department. Sam thought about his check-in at 6. He thought about Webb getting the call, and what Webb would do with the information that Sam had been running dark all night in the sector where Rachel's truck went into the creek. He thought about the 40 seconds of decision he had taken outside this cabin before he turned off his radio and drove in the wrong direction. "I need to call Captain Reyes," he said. Marsh shook her head. "Not from any device that can be traced to your location." "Then I need to physically get to her before the 6 a.m. check-in." "That means leaving this cabin." "Yes." Rachel looked at Sam with the expression she had used when she was evaluating him in the snow, the full spectrum read that took in everything about a person and filed it honestly. "If you leave and they've already started looking for you, you're driving into the search perimeter in a marked patrol unit." "I know. That's how they find this cabin." "I know that too." Sam looked at her directly. "But if I don't check in, and Reyes doesn't hear from me, she files a missing officer report, and the entire department goes active looking for me. That search runs directly through this terrain." The logic was airtight, and Rachel knew it. She did not argue. The major twist arrived when Marsh reached into her bag a second time and produced a phone. Not a personal cell. A hardened, encrypted unit, the kind that federal operations used for field communication when standard channels were compromised. She held it up and looked at Sam with an expression that told him the next piece of information was going to require him to update his understanding of how long this situation had been in motion. "Captain Reyes received a message from Thomas Adler's emergency protocol 48 hours ago," Marsh said. "She has been sitting on it without acting because she did not know if the protocol was genuine or a test of her loyalties by the network." She paused. She has been waiting for a contact that would confirm the protocol was real. She held out the phone. "This device is paired to a secure relay that Adler registered to her personal verification code. When you call her from this phone, the relay ID will confirm the protocol." Another pause. "She's already been read in Officer Black. She's been waiting for someone she trusts to make the call." Sam stared at the phone. He thought about Captain Reyes and her record that the network had tried to corrupt twice and failed. He thought about the Christmas party and Daniels's speech about integrity and whether Reyes had stood in that room and listened to that speech and known what she knew and carried it anyway. He took the phone. It rang twice. Reyes picked up and said without greeting or preamble the voice of a woman who had not been sleeping. "Tell me she's alive." Sam looked at Rachel. "She's alive, Captain." The sound on the other end of the line was small and brief and entirely human, the sound of someone releasing a breath they had been holding for 48 hours. Then Reyes's voice came back professional and grounded and carrying the particular weight of a commanding officer who has been waiting for the moment when waiting becomes action. "Where are you?" she said. Sam gave her the location. "I'll be there in 50 minutes. Don't move, don't call anyone else, and tell that dog of yours he just earned a year's worth of treats." She paused. "How many in the department know where you are?" "Nobody." "Keep it that way until I arrive." Another pause, shorter. "Good work, Sam." She had never called him Sam. In 14 months she had called him Black Officer Black, and once after a particularly ugly domestic call that had gone wrong in 3 different directions, son. Sam. She had never called him Sam. It was a small thing, and it landed with the weight of something much larger. He handed the phone back to Marsh. The second mini-climax hit 8 minutes later when the tablet Marsh had left open on the table produced an alert tone, a single low pulse that made her cross the room in 2 steps and pick it up. She read the screen, and her expression did not change in the way that experienced agents' expressions did not change when they were looking at something bad, the deliberate suppression of visible reaction as a professional discipline. "What?" Sam said. She turned the tablet. It was a law enforcement alert filed through the county system time-stamped 12 minutes ago. A welfare check request submitted by an anonymous tipster for the address of the hunting cabin. Specifically, this cabin. Specifically by address. Rachel was on her feet. "They know where we are." "They know where the cabin is," Marsh said. "They don't know if we're in it. The welfare check was submitted anonymously, which means someone in the network found the cabin in Sam's background, not through tracking." She looked at Sam. "Whose cabin is this?" "My uncle's." "Is that association findable in a department background file?" Sam thought about his hiring paperwork. The next of kin section. The personal reference section. His uncle's address listed as a secondary contact. "Yes," he said. "Then we have 20 minutes before whoever takes that welfare check call arrives at the road." Marsh was already closing the tablet and putting it in her bag. "We can't be here when they do." Rachel was already in her jacket. Sam was clipping Rex's tactical lead. The fire was still going and there was no time to deal with it, and leaving it burning was going to tell whoever arrived that the cabin had been occupied recently. But there was no version of the next 20 minutes where that information did not become available eventually, and the priority was distance. They moved out the back. Rex ran point without being asked, pushing through the snow on a bearing away from the access road toward the tree line that backed the cabin's northern face. The cold hit them like a wall after the warmth of the cabin, and Sam heard Rachel's breathing change, but she did not slow down, and she did not ask for anything. Marsh moved beside Sam. "Reyes is 50 minutes out. We need a secondary meet point that isn't connected to your personal background." "There's a fire road maintenance station 3 miles north," Sam said. "County property, not connected to me personally. Can we reach it on foot in 30 minutes? In these conditions, 40. Then we're already moving too slow." She pulled ahead, setting a pace that told Sam she had trained for exactly this kind of movement and did not intend to let the snow decide the timeline. Rex looked back at Sam once, a quick amber check, the quick look he used to confirm that Sam was still behind him and still making the calls. Sam met his eyes and gave the hand signal for continue, and Kodak faced forward and pushed on through the dark without breaking stride. Somewhere behind them, through the trees and the distance, Sam heard a vehicle engine on the access road, moving toward the cabin. Moving with the deliberate speed of someone who was not in a hurry because they believed they had the location contained. They were not in a hurry because they thought there was nowhere to run. They were wrong about that. But the window between wrong and catastrophically right was 3 miles of mountain in the dark, and it was closing faster than any of them wanted to say out loud. Rachel was running beside Sam now, close enough that he could hear every breath, and each one was even and controlled, and came from someone who had decided somewhere in the snow hours ago that she was not going to stop moving until this was finished. Not until the last name was in a courtroom, and the last file was in evidence, and Torres and the DEA analyst in Phoenix and everyone else Daniels had spent 11 years treating as acceptable losses had something that looked like an answer. Sam ran beside her and thought about 3 words in the snow, and how far those 3 words had brought him in a single night from a routine patrol on a county road to a fire road in the dark with a federal agent and a Navy SEAL and a German shepherd who had been right about every single thing since the moment he put his paws on that partition. Rex ran ahead of all of them, nose working the cold air, finding the path through the dark the way he always found things, with a certainty that did not advertise itself and did not require validation. Just forward. Always forward. One stride ahead, watching for what was coming before anyone else could see it. They reached the Fire Road maintenance station in 38 minutes, which was 2 minutes faster than Sam had estimated and felt like 20 minutes slower than the situation required. Rex found the door lock by feel in the dark, while Sam worked the override with the emergency key code that all county patrol officers carried for exactly this category of Situation 1, where the county infrastructure became the only infrastructure available. The code was 4 digits, and Sam's fingers were cold enough that he entered it wrong twice before the mechanism released. Inside, they did not use lights. Marsh had a low-output red lens flashlight that she used to navigate the space and identify the equipment stored there, a maintenance station stocked with county road tools and a CB radio mounted to the wall that ran on the county public works frequency, not the law enforcement frequency, which meant it was clean. Rachel sat on a work table and breathed deliberately. She had run 3 miles in mountain snow, 6 hours after being pulled half-dead from a drift, and her body was presenting the bill for that with compounding interest. She did not complain. She did not ask for anything. She sat and breathed and kept her eyes moving, reading the doors and the windows and the angles of the space, the way people read rooms when rooms had recently tried to kill them. "Reyes has 12 minutes, Sam said. "If she's running clean," Marsh said. "She's running clean." "You've known her 14 months. "I know some no." Sam looked at her. "But Rex has known her 6. He's never given her anything but a clear read." He paused. "I trust the dog." Marsh looked at Rex, who was stationed at the door with his nose at the gap, and his body language carrying the settled, watchful quality of an animal doing exactly the work it was built for. She seemed to make a decision. "Adler trusted animals before people for the same reason," she said. "He had a retriever that he claimed was a better judge of character than any polygraph he'd ever administered." A brief pause. He was probably right. The first mini-climax hit 6 minutes before Reyes arrived, when the CB radio produced a burst of static and then a voice on the public works frequency that should not have been on that frequency. It was a male voice running what sounded like a routine road conditions check, but the cadence was wrong. The phrasing clipped and structured in a way that matched law enforcement communication protocol rather than public works. Sam recognized it the way he recognized the wrong note in a familiar song. "That's not road crew," he said. Marsh was already at the radio listening with her full concentration. The voice ran through a sequence of location markers that taken individually meant nothing and taken together described a search pattern covering the 3-mile radius around the cabin they had just left. "They're running a grid," Marsh said, "using the public works frequency because they know our field comms are potentially monitored." She turned the radio down to the lowest audible level. "They're closer than I'd like." Rachel looked at Sam. "How many people can Daniels activate on short notice? In this county on this shift?" Sam thought about the 4 names from Marsh's list and the department's overnight rotation and the officers he had worked beside for 14 months without knowing what some of them were carrying. "Enough." Rex left the door and moved to the north-facing wall. He stood with his head up and his ears fully forward and made the sound the one between a growl and a bark that meant proximity and human and not friendly. But this time it came with a different quality underneath it, a recognition note that Sam had only heard from him once before when they had encountered a suspect that Rex had processed on an earlier call and remembered. Rex had encountered someone outside this building before tonight. "He knows whoever's out there," Sam said quietly. Marsh killed the flashlight. The silence was total, except for the wind and Rex's controlled breathing and the distant engine sound of a vehicle on the fire road moving toward the station from the south, which was either Reyes or everything they were trying to avoid, and there was no way to know which until it was close enough to identify. Sam moved to the window. He looked through the gap in the frame and saw headlights. Single vehicle. Moving at the pace of someone who knew where they were going and was not attempting concealment. Which could mean Reyes, who had nothing to conceal from, Or it could mean someone who had located the station through the grid search and was approaching with the confidence of institutional cover. Rex growled once very low and then went silent. The vehicle stopped. A door opened. Footsteps in snow measured and even. A knock on the station door 3 times, and then a voice that made the tension in Sam's chest release in one long, controlled exhale. "Black, it's Reyes. I'm alone." He opened the door. Captain Donna Reyes was 51 years old and had been in law enforcement for 27 of them, and she carried those years the way structures carried load, not visibly, but in the density of how she moved and spoke and occupied a room. She stepped inside and looked at Rachel first, then Marsh, then Sam, then Rex, and her expression did the same thing it always did when she was processing a complex scene. It went very still and very focused, and she did not speak until she had the full picture. "Rachel Hunter," she said. Not a question. "Captain," Rachel said. "I read Adler's briefing document 48 hours ago." Reyes looked at her with an expression that carried the specific weight of a senior officer looking at someone who has done something extraordinary and is trying to find the appropriate language for it. "What you've been doing for 14 months, I want you to know I understand what it cost." Rachel looked at her for a moment. "With respect, Captain, we can do that later. Right now I need to know what you can move tonight." Reyes did not take offense. She recognized operational priority when she heard it. "I have 4 officers I trust completely. None of them are on Marsh's list. I've kept them clean deliberately, which means Daniels's network has no read on them." She looked at Marsh. "What do you need?" The major twist arrived in Marsh's answer, delivered with the precision of someone releasing information that had been classified until this exact moment, because this exact moment was what it had been held for. "We don't need bodies," Marsh said. "We need one door opened from the inside." She reached into her bag and produced a folder, physical documents rather than the tablet, and handed it to Reyes. "Daniels is going to be in his office at 7 a.m. He comes in early on mornings after a network operation because he needs to manage the information flow before the day shift arrives. He's done it consistently for 6 years according to the communication intercepts." She paused. At 7 a.m. Daniels will access the department's evidence management system to flag 3 items for administrative review. Those 3 items are pieces of physical evidence from the Torres case that were never officially closed. He flags them, they move to a destruction queue, and the last physical chain connecting Torres to his operation disappears. Reyes was reading the folder as Marsh spoke. Her jaw tightened on the 2nd page. On the 3rd page, she stopped and looked up. This is his personal access log for the evidence system. 11 entries over 4 years, each one corresponding to a date within 72 hours of a federal investigation closing without indictment. Marsh met her eyes. "We need someone inside the building to document the 7th a.m. access in real time. Time-stamped, authenticated, witnessed by a credentialed law enforcement officer not connected to the network." "That's your activation event," Reyes said. "That's our activation event. The moment he touches that evidence log tonight, the entire financial record, the communication intercepts, Rachel's testimony, and Adler's parallel case file all become active instruments in a federal criminal proceeding. Everything activates simultaneously." She paused. "But we need the real-time documentation. Without it, his attorneys argue the digital record was manipulated, and we spend 2 years in pre-trial motions." Reyes closed the folder. She looked at Sam. "You know the building's layout better than anyone on my clean roster. You know the evidence management room's position relative to Daniels's office. You know which routes have camera coverage and which don't." She said it plainly without pressure, laying it out as a factual inventory. I'm not ordering you to do this. Sam stood in the maintenance station in the dark with Rex beside him and thought about 14 months of doing a job he believed in and about Marcus Webb, shaking his hand at the end of his evaluation, and about Torres in a hospital bed in San Diego, and about a woman who had spent 14 months alone doing the thing that nobody around her had the courage to do. He thought about 3 words in the snow. "What time do I need to be in position?" he said. Reyes looked at him with an expression that was not pride exactly, but occupied the same territory. 5:30, before the network assets arrive for the 6 a.m. shift change. The second mini-climax hit when Marcia's encrypted phone pulsed once. She read it and turned to Rachel. "The truck was pulled from the creek 40 minutes ago. They've confirmed no body in the vehicle." She paused. "Daniels knows you're alive." The air in the station changed. Not dramatically, but everyone in the room felt the timeline compress the comfortable hours they had believed they were working with contracting into something much smaller and sharper. "He's going to move the evidence tonight," Rachel said. "He's not going to wait until 7 a.m. He's going to go in now before dawn, before the day shift, before whatever protocol he normally follows, because the protocol assumed I was dead, and I'm not." Marsh was already running it. "If he moves the evidence before we have the real-time documentation, we lose the activation event." "Then Sam needs to be in position before Daniels decides to go in early," Rachel said. She looked at Sam with the direct, unadorned clarity of someone who has spent 14 months learning to say what needed to be said without softening it into something easier. "How fast can you get to the department?" 20 minutes from here in the patrol unit. You'll be in a marked vehicle. If any of the 4 network officers are running the sector, they'll log your position." "I know. Daniels will know you've been running dark all night. A marked unit approaching the department building before 5 a.m. is not going to read as routine." "No," Sam said. "It's not." He looked at Reyes. "But a marked unit responding to a welfare check on a department building after an anonymous tip about a perimeter alarm would." Reyes understood immediately. "I can generate that call through the Public Works dispatch relay. It routes to the overnight desk without going through the law enforcement channel." She looked at Marsh. "Does that create an evidentiary problem?" "Not if the call is documented in the Public Works log before Sam arrives at the building," Marsh said. "The log timestamps are legally independent of the law enforcement system." She looked between Reyes and Sam. "Do it." The third mini-climax arrived 2 minutes later when Rex, who had returned to the door after Reyes's arrival and had been maintaining his watch position with the patience of an animal that understood his job was continuous rather than episodic, made a sound that stopped everyone in the room cold. Not the between growl, not the false alarm double sneeze. Something Sam had never heard from him in 14 months of working together, a low, sustained, single-pitch sound that carried in it a quality he could only describe as recognition, combined with warning, the sound of a dog who knew exactly who was outside and was telling his handler that the outside and the inside were about to occupy the same space. Someone was at the door, and it was not someone Rex had decided was safe. Sam was moving before the sound finished. He positioned beside the doorframe with his weapon drawn and his shoulder against the wall. Marsh had Rachel behind the equipment rack. Reyes had her own weapon up and was covering the window. The knock came. 2 sharp raps. A pause. Then a voice that made Sam's hand tighten on his weapon and his jaw set with the hard, specific anger of a betrayal that had been building for 48 hours and had just arrived at its destination. "Sam," Marcus Webb's voice coming through the door, with the careful, non-threatening projection of a man who wanted the person on the other side to understand he was not there to fight. I know you're in there. Rex logged your patrol unit on the fire road camera at 4:22. I've been running solo on this sector since midnight and nobody else knows where you are. A pause. I'm not here for Daniels. I need you to hear that before anything else. Sam did not move. He looked at Rex. The dog's sustained warning sound had dropped to silence the moment Webb's voice came through the door, but he was still at full alert. Body-rigid amber eyes on the door, reading through 2 inches of wood with his nose and whatever else dogs used when their nose ran out of answers. Rex looked back at Sam. His tail moved once, not the all-clear sweep, the ambivalent single beat that meant complicated. Not resolved, but not the worst thing either. Talk from where you are, Sam said through the door. A silence. Then Webb's voice lower now, and stripped of its professional surface the voice of a man who had set down something heavy. I've been in Daniels's network for 3 years. I went in voluntarily because he had documentation on my brother that would have sent him to federal prison. I've been feeding him low-level information and running interference on calls he flagged. A pause that carried the weight of 3 years in it. I have never touched a witness. I have never moved evidence. I have never done anything that put someone in the ground. I drew a line and I have held it for 3 years, and it has cost me everything I used to think I was. Sam held still. Reyes was watching him. Marsh was watching him. Rachel from behind the equipment rack said nothing, which told Sam she was letting him run this because she understood it was his call to make. Torres, Sam said through the door. A petty officer in San Diego. 28 years old. Parking garage. A long silence. I didn't know about Torres until 4 months after it happened. When I found out, I called the number Daniels had given me for emergencies, and I told him if anything like that ever ran through my sector, I was done, and I was going to the FBI. Webb paused. He told me my brother's file would be on the DA's desk within 24 hours. And you stayed? I stayed. It came out flat and honest, and carrying the full shame of it without asking for absolution. I'm not asking you to forgive that. I'm asking you to let me do one thing before this is over that puts me on the right side of what I should have been 3 years ago. Sam looked at the door. He looked at Rex. The dog's body had shifted subtly, but definitively away from the full alert rigidity of a warning posture into something that was not relaxed, but was no longer reading imminent threat. He opened the door. Webb stood in the snow and looked at Sam with the expression of a man who had stopped performing and had nothing left between himself and what he actually was. He looked older than Sam had ever seen him. He looked like a person who had been carrying a specific weight for 3 years and had recently decided that the weight was going to kill him before he found the courage to put it down. He looked at Rachel. Recognition moved across his face, confirming what he had clearly already worked out from the pieces available to him. Then he looked at Marsh, whose federal credentials he processed in 2 seconds with the assessment of an experienced officer. Daniels got a call 20 minutes ago, he said. He's going to the building at 5 a.m., not 7. He's moving the evidence tonight. He looked at Sam. I know the evidence room's override sequence, the one that bypasses the access log timestamp. He's going to use it to make the access look like it happened at 9 a.m. rather than 5 during normal hours when it's unambiguous. He reached into his jacket, slowly, visibly, making every movement readable. He produced a small device, a black rectangle the size of a USB drive. This is a forensic timestamp recorder. It documents every system access in the evidence management room with an independent clock that cannot be retroactively altered. It has to be physically installed in the room before Daniels arrives. He held it out. It has to be someone he's not expecting. Sam looked at the device. He looked at Webb. He thought about 14 months and handshakes and a performance evaluation, and the specific grinding cost of finding out that something you had trusted was not what it appeared to be. He thought about what it meant that Webb was here, that Rex's warning had shifted into complexity rather than danger, that a man who had made 3 years of wrong decisions had driven to a mountain maintenance station at 5 in the morning to try to make one right one. He took the device. Marsh stepped forward and took Webb's arm, not forcefully, with the professional contact of someone establishing custody that the other person had already agreed to. You're going to tell me everything you know about the network's current operational posture. Every asset, every communication channel, every protocol Daniels uses for an emergency evidence move. She looked at him steadily. And then we're going to talk about your brother. Webb looked at her. Something in his face shifted a wall he had been holding for 3 years, finding its last support knocked out from under it. His name is Danny, he said. His voice was not steady. He's 24. He made one stupid decision on one bad night, and Daniels has owned me with it for 3 years. Tell me everything, Marsh said. We'll take care of Danny. Sam was already moving to the patrol unit with Rex beside him, and the timestamp device in his chest pocket next to the drive that Rachel had given him in the cabin, 2 small pieces of hardware carrying between them the weight of 11 years of crimes and 3 years of cowardice, and 14 months of the most extraordinary courage he had ever been close to. Reyes caught his arm at the vehicle door. Sam. She held his eyes. You come back out of that building. You hear me? Whatever happens inside you, come back out. Yes, Captain. The badge you're wearing. She looked at his chest. It means something. It has always meant something, regardless of what some of the people wearing it have done with it. Don't forget that tonight. Sam got in the vehicle. Rex jumped into the rear compartment and was in position before Sam had the engine running. His body settled and ready, his amber eyes visible in the rearview mirror, watching Sam with the steady, absolute attention of an animal that had already decided where he stood and was not going to change his mind. The patrol unit rolled out onto the fire road and headed south toward a department building where a man who had spent 11 years converting institutional trust into personal power was about to walk into an evidence room and make the last unmonitored decision of his life. Sam drove and did not think about the 4 names on Marsh's list, or the officers he would pass in the parking lot, or the 17 years of institutional architecture that Daniels had built around himself. He thought about 3 words in the snow. He thought about the weight of the drive in his chest pocket. He thought about Torres at 28 years old, gripping a wrist in a hospital room, spending the last of what he had to say, the thing that needed to be said. And Rex in the rear compartment pressed his nose against the partition and breathed slowly and watched his handler drive toward the thing that was waiting for both of them. Forward. Always forward. The way it had always been between them from the very first night Sam had opened a truck door and followed a German shepherd into the dark, and trusted that wherever the dog was going was exactly where they needed to be. The department parking lot had 2 vehicles in it when Sam pulled in at 4:51 a.m. One belonged to the overnight desk officer, a name not on Marsh's list. The other was Daniels's personal vehicle, a black SUV parked in the deputy chief's reserved space with the engine still ticking from a recent arrival. He was already inside. Sam sat in the patrol unit for 4 seconds and recalibrated. The plan had assumed a 7 a.m. arrival that had moved to 5 a.m. It had not assumed 4:51. The 11-minute difference between what they had planned for and what was happening was not catastrophic, but it was the kind of gap where everything either held together or came apart, and the difference between those 2 outcomes was whether Sam moved in the next 30 seconds or spent another 4 seconds sitting in the parking lot thinking about it. He got out. Rex came with him, and Sam did not put him on the lead, because a K-9 officer entering a building with his dog on a lead looked like a patrol response, and a K-9 officer entering with his dog loose at his side looked like a man who belonged there and had not thought twice about coming in. The overnight desk officer was a young woman named Carver, who had been on the job for 8 months, and who looked up when Sam came through the door with the mild, uncomplicated attention of someone who had no reason to find his presence surprising. "Black," she said. "Thought you were running the east sector tonight." "Welfare check brought me back this way," Sam said. He kept his pace even, and his voice at the register of mild professional inconvenience. "Deputy Chief came in about 10 minutes ago. Didn't sign the log." She said it with the small, unconscious emphasis of someone noting an irregularity they had not yet decided whether to report. "He forget to sign in again." Sam made it sound familiar, the tone of a junior officer covering for a superior's habitual minor procedural lapse. He saw her relax by a fraction. "I'll remind him on my way through." He walked past the desk and down the corridor toward the evidence management room, and Rex moved beside him with his nails quiet on the linoleum and his body language carrying the total grounded calm of an animal who had assessed the building and found nothing in it that exceeded his capacity to handle. The first mini-climax arrived when Sam reached the corridor junction 20 feet from the evidence room and heard voices. 2 of them. Daniels was not alone. Sam stopped at the junction and pressed his back to the wall and listened. One voice was Daniel's, low and controlled and carrying the particular cadence of a man giving instructions he expected to be followed without discussion. The second voice was one Sam recognized from 2 years of shift briefings and department trainings, a voice he had trusted the same way he had trusted Webb, with the open faith of someone who had not yet learned to audit his own trust. Sergeant Paul Greer, 18-year veteran. 4th name on Marsh's list. The Torres physical file and the 2 supplemental evidence bags, Daniels was saying. Destruction queue administrative review designation, my authorization. The timestamp override puts the access at 9:14 this morning, normal review hours. A pause. "How long?" "6 minutes, Greer said. "Maybe 7. "You have 4. Sam had the timestamp device in his hand. Webb had shown him the installation point during the 2 minutes they had stood together outside the maintenance station before Sam got in the patrol unit a specific port behind the secondary monitor on the evidence room's eastern wall, accessible without triggering the primary system alert if approached from the correct angle. The device had to be physically in the room before Daniels accessed the evidence log, or the timestamp record would begin after the access, and the forensic window would be incomplete. He had approximately 45 seconds before Daniels moved to the evidence terminal. Sam looked at Rex. The dog was reading him with the amber-eyed, full-attention focus he brought to the moments when the next 30 seconds mattered more than everything before them. Sam gave the hand signal for quiet advance, a gesture he had trained Rex on for exactly the kind of situation where noise was the variable between a successful approach and a failed one. Rex acknowledged the signal with one small movement of his ears and fell into the precise, soundless heel position that 14 months of work had built between them. Sam came around the corner. The second mini-climax hit when Greer saw him first. The sergeant was standing at the evidence room doorway, and his eyes found Sam in the corridor, and the 3 seconds that followed were the 3 seconds that decided everything. Greer's expression ran through recognition calculation, and a decision that Sam could see forming in real time, the decision about which direction to move and how fast, and whether the young officer in the corridor had information or was walking into something he did not understand. Sam did not give him the 3 seconds to finish the calculation. "Sergeant Greer." He said it with the tone of someone who had been looking for exactly this person. Neutral. Professional. Not accusatory and not deferential. The tone of an officer who was exactly where he was supposed to be and had a reason for being there that had nothing to do with what was happening in the room behind Greer's left shoulder. "Carver said the deputy chief came in without signing the log. Captain Reyes called me about the sign-in protocol. She wants it corrected before the day shift." Greer stared at him. The calculation was still running. Sam watched it run and kept his expression carrying nothing except the mild administrative inconvenience of an officer relaying a captain's instruction at 5 in the morning. From inside the evidence room, Daniels's voice. "Greer! Clock!" Greer looked back into the room. In that half-second of diverted attention, Sam moved. Not fast enough to read as urgent. Fast enough. He came through the doorway past Greer's left shoulder with the timestamp device palmed in his right hand and his body angled toward the eastern wall in the natural movement of someone entering a room and orienting toward its far side, and he found the secondary monitor and the port behind it and seated the device in 2 seconds with the practiced certainty of a man who had done it 100 times, which he had not, but whose hands had been steady enough for 14 months of work that required precision under pressure. The device seated with a click that was very small in the silence of the evidence room. Daniels was at the primary terminal. He turned when he heard the click. The major twist arrived in the look on Eric Daniels's face, not the expression Sam had been braced for, not anger or threat, or the cold executive fury of a man whose operation had been interrupted. What crossed Daniels's face in the 2 seconds before he controlled it was recognition, and beneath the recognition was something that looked impossibly like calculation that had already been running for longer than tonight. "Officer Black," Daniels said. His voice was as smooth and even as it had been at every Christmas party and every briefing and every corridor conversation for 14 months. "You've had an eventful night." "Yes, sir." "You've been running dark for 5 hours." "Signal interference in the east sector, sir. I've been trying to reach dispatch." Daniels looked at him for a long moment. He did not look at the eastern wall. He did not look at Rex, who had moved to Sam's left side and was sitting with his body perfectly still and his amber eyes on Daniels, with the total unwavering attention of an animal that had taken his full measure and filed every detail. "Where is she?" Daniels said. He dropped the pretense with the clean efficiency of a man who had decided that the performance was no longer worth the energy it cost. "Rachel Hunter, the woman you found on County Road 9 tonight. Where is she?" The third mini-climax hit when Sam understood from the specificity of that question that Daniels had more information than the truck in the creek should have given him. He knew the county road. He knew the time and the location. He knew Sam had found her, which meant the welfare check submission to the cabin, the one that had come through the county system 40 minutes after they arrived, had not been generated by someone running a background search on Sam's personnel file. It had been generated by someone who had been watching Sam before he found Rachel. Someone who had been running surveillance on that sector specifically because they knew Rachel's contact protocol included a fallback route through County Road 9. Someone who had known Rachel was coming before she arrived. "The DOJ contact," Sam said. Not the name. The category. He watched Daniels's face for the confirmation. He got it. 1/2 second of something behind Daniels's eyes that was not fear, but was its functional equivalent, the recognition that the person across the room had just found a piece of the architecture that was supposed to be invisible. "Thomas Adler," Sam said. "You didn't just compromise his communication channel. You had someone inside his office who knew Rachel's fallback protocol. He paused. That's how you knew she was coming to Colorado. That's how you had 2 vehicles in position at the Hendricks Creek Bridge. And that's how you generated the welfare check on the cabin, because you had the fallback route before she even arrived. Greer moved. Sam heard him shift behind him, and Rex was turning before the shift finished pivoting to Greer's position, with a speed and directness that stopped the sergeant mid-motion, with the simple physical argument of 85 pounds of German Shepherd between his hands and everything he had intended to do with them. Greer went very still. "Paul," Daniels said, and his voice carried a tiredness in it that was not theatrical, the tiredness of a man who had been managing moving parts for 11 years and had just watched 2 of them fail simultaneously. "Don't." Greer did not move. What happened in the next 4 minutes was not dramatic in the way that confrontations in stories were usually dramatic. There was no raised weapon, no physical struggle, no moment of operatic resolution. There was a room with 4 people, and a dog, and a timestamp device recording every second of it to an independent forensic clock and a deputy chief of police who had spent 11 years building an institutional architecture of protection around himself, and who had in the last 4 minutes watched that architecture develop a crack that no amount of management was going to close. Daniel sat down. He sat down in the chair at the evidence terminal without being asked and without being told, and he put his hands flat on the surface of the desk, and he looked at Sam with an expression that had finally shed everything that was performance, and was left with only what was real underneath. "How much do you have?" he said. "Enough," Sam said. "Specific. 14 months of financial documentation, communication intercepts, physical evidence chain, 2 federal case files, 1 active, 1 parallel." Sam paused. "And a real-time forensic timestamp record of everything that has happened in this room in the last 7 minutes. Daniels looked at the eastern wall. He looked at the secondary monitor. He looked at the port behind it, where the device was seated, and the expression that crossed his face in that moment was not the calculated assessment of a man planning his next move. It was the expression of a man who had made one miscalculation too many and had arrived at the end of his own architecture. "The Torres file," he said, quietly, almost to himself. "Torres," Sam said, "and the DEA analyst in Phoenix, and 11 officers across 3 departments, and 17 years of federal investigations that closed without indictment because you made sure they would." He held Daniels's gaze. "And Rachel Hunter, who you ran off a bridge tonight and left for dead in the snow because she was the one person you could not manage." Daniels said nothing. Rex had not moved from his position between Greer and the rest of the room. He was not aggressive. He was simply there the way he was always simply there, with the total grounded certainty of an animal who knew where the line was and had positioned himself on it. The 4th mini-climax arrived when Sam's personal cell vibrated in his pocket. He answered it without taking his eyes off Daniels. Marsh's voice. "The federal arrest team is 4 minutes out. Keep them in the room." "They're not going anywhere," Sam said. Daniels heard both sides of the call. He looked at Sam with the last remnant of an expression that might have been respect, the professional acknowledgement of one tactician for another. And then it closed, and there was nothing left on his face except the flat, unreadable patience of a man who had decided to stop performing and was waiting for what came next. What came next was 4 FBI vehicles and a federal arrest warrant, and Thomas Adler, who arrived in the 3rd vehicle, looking like a man who had spent 9 days in protective custody wanting very badly to be somewhere else and had finally gotten his wish. He walked into the evidence room and looked at Daniels, and did not say anything for a long moment. Then he looked at Sam, And what was in his face when he looked at a 25-year-old patrol officer standing beside his German shepherd in an evidence room at 5 in the morning was the kind of gratitude that did not translate into words and did not try to. "Hunter," Adler said. "She's safe." "She's safe," Sam said. The federal process that followed was long and procedural and entirely without drama, which was exactly how federal arrests were supposed to go, and which was the most reassuring thing Sam had seen all night. Daniels was read his rights by an agent who had clearly read many people their rights, and did it with the clean, practiced neutrality of a professional doing a job. Greer was separated and processed. The timestamp device was recovered by an evidence technician who handled it with the careful attention of someone who understood what it contained. Sam stood in the corridor outside the evidence room, and Rex leaned against his leg, and they both watched the process run its course. Reyes arrived at 5:31 and stood beside Sam, without speaking for a moment, the silence of two people who had been through something together and had not yet found the language for it. "Carver's going to have a story to tell on her next shift," Sam said. Reyes made a sound that was almost a laugh. "She's going to be fine. She didn't know anything and her instincts were right all night." She looked at him. "How are you?" Sam thought about that honestly. He thought about everything the last 7 hours had cost him, the uncomplicated belief in the institution he had served, the version of some colleagues he would never get back, the particular kind of tiredness that came not from physical exertion, but from finding out that the world was more complicated and more costly than you had believed it was when you pinned on a badge for the first time. "I'm okay," he said. "Ask me again in a week." "I will." Reyes looked at Rex. "How's he?" Rex was sitting on Sam's boot. His amber eyes were moving slowly through the corridor, the steady, continuous assessment of an animal who had decided the immediate situation was stable and was now simply monitoring. His tail moved once when Reyes said his name. "He's been right about everything all night," Sam said. "I'd say he's earned about a year's worth of treats." "I believe I said exactly that several hours ago," Reyes said. Rachel found Sam at 6:15 in the department parking lot, arriving with Marsh in the federal vehicle, moving with more steadiness than she had any physical right to after the night her body had been through. She looked at the building and then at Sam, and she did not say the things that the moment might have invited no expression of gratitude, that would have felt insufficient for what had been done. No summary of what it meant that it was over. She had been a SEAL for 10 years, and she understood that the people who ran toward the difficult thing did not do it for the language that came after. She looked at Rex instead. She crouched down in the snow and held out her hand, and Rex walked to her without hesitation and pressed his forehead against her palm, the gesture of recognition and trust that he gave to very few people, and that Sam had long since learned could not be trained or coerced. "Good dog," she said quietly. Rex leaned into her hand. She stood up and looked at Sam. "Torres would have liked knowing it ended this way," she said. Sam thought about Torres at 28 years old in a hospital bed, spending the last thing he had to say, the one sentence that needed to be said, trusting that somewhere at the end of that sentence, someone would be listening. "Yeah," Sam said. He would have. The investigation that followed ran for 11 months and produced federal indictments on 23 individuals across 4 agencies, including the DOJ asset inside Adler's office, whose name had been the last piece of the architecture, and whose arrest closed the last gap in the case Rachel had been building since a man gripped her wrist in San Diego and told her the truth with the last of what he had. Daniels was convicted on 9 counts. Greer cooperated, and his cooperation along with Webb's testimony provided the evidentiary foundation for 6 of those convictions. Webb's brother Danny had his case reviewed by the Federal Oversight Office, and the charges were dismissed for insufficient evidence, which was not the same as innocence, but was the closest thing to justice the situation could accommodate. Rachel Hunter returned to service 8 months after the bridge assigned to a Naval Oversight Unit, whose mandate covered exactly the kind of institutional accountability that her 14 months in Colorado had demonstrated was possible when one person decided that the truth was worth carrying alone, until it wasn't alone anymore. Sam Black was promoted to detective 7 months after Daniels's arrest, assigned to a newly created internal accountability division that Captain Reyes had proposed and that the county commissioners had approved with a unanimous vote that would have been unimaginable 12 months earlier. Rex was officially transferred with him, which required 3 separate pieces of paperwork and a departmental policy amendment that Reyes processed with the quiet efficiency of someone who had already decided the outcome and was merely managing the documentation. On the day Sam pinned on the detective's shield, Rex was sitting on his left foot, and Rex's tail was moving with the slow, steady sweep of an animal entirely at home, in the moment entirely certain of the person beside him, entirely ready for whatever came next. Sam looked down at him and thought about a county road in the dark, and a door he had opened because a dog told him to, and 3 words spoken by a woman who had used the last of everything she had to say, the most important thing she knew. Some decisions look small in the moment they are made. The decision to follow a dog into the snow. The decision to turn off a radio. The decision to believe a woman whose lips were the color of a bruise and whose right hand was still on a knife. Those decisions do not feel like the ones that change the world, but they are always exactly the ones that do. If this story moved something in you, type "Amen" in the comments right now and tell us the name of your city. I want to see how far 3 words in the snow can travel. And if you believe that the truth is always worth carrying, no matter how long you have to carry it alone, subscribe to this channel. There are more stories, waiting stories about the ones who listened when everyone else looked away, and in listening changed everything.